Hello and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for yet another tech drop-in session. It's good to have these sessions on a regular cadence, and I'm glad that we are seeing a very nice and healthy attendance across the region. So thank you for your time. As I see, we are past 50 odd people on the bridge, so I think I'm going to get started. So today we have Jacqueline Fu is our solutions architect based out of Singapore. Jacqueline is going to be presenting to us about NetBackup 10 and automated operations in cloud. Supporting Jacqueline will be Daniel Go and myself. Daniel is our sales engineering team leader out of Singapore, and I am the solutions architect here in Melbourne. So Daniel and I will support Jacqueline during the session. We appreciate all the questions that you have on the Q&A section. So feel free to type in your questions as we go along. Don't wait for the end of the session or the end of the topic. Bring up your questions as soon as you can. And the best question for today, as always, is going to be awarded a $25 gift voucher from Amazon. So, feel free to bring in any question that you have related to this topic or in general around data management as well as Veritas product portfolio. Just make sure that you put it in that Q&A section, and Daniel and I will try to respond to your questions as we go. And every now and then we will have a chance to bring up some noteworthy questions back to the broader audience for a discussion. So just make sure that you type in your questions as we go. Now, before I hand it back to Jacqueline, I'm going to start with a quick poll, and I'm going to get you to help me out with your preference. The question is, what are the cloud data protection methodologies that you are already using or planning to use? Now, this is something that we are hearing throughout throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic era, that the transformation to cloud has just been faster than ever. And that means that cloud data protection methodologies are also evolving. So we wanted to understand as we go forward as a baseline of where we are and what are your thoughts around the cloud data protection methodology. So we'll probably give another 5 seconds for everyone to respond, and then we'll close the poll. And as we wait for the results, I'm going to hand it over to Jacqueline. Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks, Amit. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. And
Okay, sure.
we can close the poll as well now.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks, Amit. Okay. Yep, the poll result has come out. So, yep. So we're getting quite a fair percentage of audience that is using the cloud native snapshots tool, as well as using the cloud the application database tools that is actually residing in the cloud itself, right? So in terms of NetBackup, okay, yeah, we're fairly competitive as well with the cloud native tools. Okay, sure. So let me just close the poll result and just let me get on to the deck for today. Okay, so thanks, Amit, for the introduction. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So today's topic, as what Amit has mentioned, so this is one of the areas that we're looking at for the NetBackup 10 release. So this is all about automated operations. So in terms of the automated operations, there are three areas that we are looking at. So in terms of the elastic cloud backup and recovery services, the auto scaling capabilities, as well as the data deduplication services that we have actually launched within this pillar itself. So to recap, and of course, to bring about how we actually get onto this journey on this automation itself. So we actually first started off back in NetBackup 8.3. So this is the version where we actually first introduced API first approach, whereby we're able to actually do a automated discovery of the assets across the domain itself and be able to deliver IT as a service. So over in NetBackup 9.0, we actually brought about containerizing our NetBackup services And we also introduce our FlexScale appliance. So for those of you audience, right, that have not heard or have not been updated about FlexScale appliance, so it's actually our hyper-converged scale-out architecture of our NetBackup services that is actually put onto the certified hardware vendors on this x86 hardware platform itself, right? And of course, in NetBackup 9.1, we have actually brought forth our containerized services, which is actually on the FlexScale appliance onto the cloud itself to make it more elastic, stable. So in terms of auto scaling of cloud compute resources, and as well as that, we are also introducing our recovery vault, which is a storage as a service offering in the cloud. And of course, in the current as well as our latest version in NetBackup 10, so we're actually making all these services that we have in the cloud into more containerized and converting all these containers into composable microservices. And of course, we're also integrating the SaaS protection as well as the IT analytics as well as insight as a foundation into our NetBackup 10 portfolio. As well as that, we are also able to automate the provisioning as well as dynamically allocate the on-demand services in NetBackup 10 itself. But of course, we are actually not stopping here. So in terms of what we are having as a vision for the NetBackup release that is actually beyond NetBackup 10 itself, we're actually making all these services into a more autonomous data protection platform. So we're able to actually sense in terms of the state of the workloads that you are actually backing up in your environment. And of course, we're actually utilizing all this AI, ML powered machine learning techniques to be able to actually put forth the intelligent automation of our NetBackup services into a more self-provisioning, self-configuring, self-optimizing, as well as self-healing architecture for the customers out there. So before we actually brought about this, right, I would want to bring up our second poll. So this is our second poll. So in terms of the questions, which of the below characteristics are most important for your cloud journey? So you can actually opt for any one of this.
We'll probably give another 5 seconds before we can close the poll.
Okay.
Yep. Trudy, if you could close the poll for us, please.
Okay, so there we have it. So I think in terms of the percentage itself, we've got quite a number of audience that is actually opting for all of the above, whereby we talk about elasticity, right? Grow and stream based on your needs and requirements out in the cloud itself. Customers also want the ease of deployment. So be it whether it's on the marketplace or in terms of the cloud formation templates that we're actually providing to customers. And of course, in terms of security, so customers is actually also looking at air-gapped networks and control out in the cloud. And of course, automation. So everybody actually talks about automation. So it's also no surprise that customers would also like some sort of automation over in the cloud to help them to actually manage whatever workloads in terms of the data protection needs that they want to cater on for in the cloud itself. So this would actually set the stage, okay, into my slide over here. So in terms of what are we hearing from our customers out there? So we have been talking to a lot of our customers, right? So yeah, we are also getting some of the feedbacks as well. So what we have actually noticed from our customers is that 60% of the organizations out there actually do not follow the cloud data protection best practices. So in terms of the 3-2-1 rules, right? The 3 copies having 2 copies on different medium as well as 1 copy on offsite. So we are actually not seeing that customers are actually following these best practices when they're actually backing up their workloads over in the cloud. So in terms of cloud transformation, So as what Amit has actually mentioned, yeah, cloud transformation, customers actually wants it to be more agile, right? And of course, it's actually beyond just IaaS that we actually talk about. And of course, out in the cloud itself, right? We are also hearing from customers that what they are all doing is actually taking a snapshots out from the workloads that they're actually placing in the clouds. So we actually have to agree to certain extents, right? That these snapshots are actually not backups, right? So that's why over in NetBackup 10 itself, we have actually put forth a few of the capabilities whereby we're actually helping customers to actually auto-scale our data protection solution with containers. So we're also putting out a scale out MSDP engine, whereby it's actually running on microservices that is residing on a Kubernetes platform. So we are also helping customers to actually be able to back up the snapshots onto our MSDP pool. And we're also able to take the backup copies to be able to duplicate it and of course to replicate it, be it whether to different region or to another cloud provider or whether it's back to on-prem. And of course, we are also up leveling in terms of the best practices. 3-2-1 instead of 3-2-1 and 1 over in the cloud itself. So the business outcomes, right, that we're actually delivering to all the customers out there is of course in terms of the operational efficiency. So we're helping customers to actually dynamic spin up and spin down in terms of the compute resources that's needed for backing up all these snapshots. We're also helping customers to simplify in terms of the manageability of the backend storage that you're using to store the backup images by using Kubernetes clusters to deploy our MSDP engine. Now, of course, in terms of the TCO itself, right, we're also helping customers in a way to back up the backup images onto our Dedupe storage pool itself. We're able to actually reduce up to 95% of the storage cost. And in terms of these snapshots that we're actually backing up to MSDP pool. And of course, we're able to actually tilt to a lower cost of the storage offerings for longer term retention. And in terms of the resiliency as well as security. So what we are actually putting onto the cloud is we are actually be able to back up all these backup images onto a warm capable storage over in the cloud itself, be it whether it's the AWS immutable log or be it whether it's on the Azure immutable storage, as well as to back to on-prem, whereby we are having the flex appliance to meet to the immutable storage capabilities. And of course, we're able to replicate all these backups across the different regions and across different cloud platforms, right? And of course, lastly, in terms of up-leveling the best practices, we're able to provide multiple copies of the backup images with an air-gap solutions. And of course, we are also catering our recovery vault, which is our storage as a service offering for customers that wants to segregate their production workloads out from the backup copies that they have over in the cloud itself. Okay, so in terms of this, so in terms of this NetBackup 10, right? So what we have actually introducing is our Elastic Cloud Data Protection Solutions. So what this means is that we're actually putting in place our intelligent cloud policy engine, whereby it's able to actually automatic discover the cloud assets or the workloads that you're actually placing out in the cloud. We're able to take a snapshots copy and back up all these snapshots copy into our MSDP pool. And of course, all these things is actually done in a auto-scaling environment whereby we're able to spin up more compute resources. If let's say there's more workloads that's anticipated to increase the performance of it as well. And of course, in conjunction, right, for our MSDP engine, we're actually putting it onto Kubernetes cluster platform, such that it's able to scale out as well as scale out as and when the storage capacity required. And of course, thereafter, we're able to actually perform a backup as well as to duplicate the backup copies and be able to replicate the backup copies on the different cloud providers or even back to on-premise. if you would like it, or even to our NetBackup Recovery Vault to be able to segregate your production workloads from your backup copies. So in terms of the cloud intelligent policies, so I'm sure many of you customers out there, right, have heard about this intelligent policies. So this is actually no stranger to every one of you out there. So intelligent policies, right, back in the last few versions that we have actually introduced this intelligent policies capabilities for our VMware workloads, for Oracle databases, as well as our SQL databases. So what this cloud intelligent policy is doing is that we're actually leveraging the text that is actually used to identify the VMs and be automatically being discovered within the protection plan itself. So you will actually not miss backing up any single one of the VMs that is actually created over in the cloud itself, right? And of course, this functionality that we have for this intelligent policies is actually having the consistent functionality, be it whether it's on Azure, AWS, or GCPs. So in terms of this auto-scaling client capabilities that we have, okay, so we are actually catering a special NetBackup team client that is actually developed for low cost, as well as to be able to auto-scale as and when the demands of the backup load actually increases. So what it does is that whenever there's a increase in the number of backup jobs, we'll be able to actually spin up additional containers or VM extensions out to actually help with the snapshots, as well as to back up all these snapshots onto the MSDP pool. And of course, once the backup has completed, we're able to actually spin down or destroy all these thin clients when it's no longer needed at all. And of course, in NetBackup 10 itself, we have actually introduced this backup from Snapshot with fill-out architecture for AWS. So if you know of 9.1 itself, we have also introduced a similar capabilities on our Azure cloud. So this is kind of like the same comparable capabilities that we have also introduced in AWS for this NetBackup 10 version. But of course, what is actually additional out from this backup from Snapshot capabilities is that we are also adding on this accelerator feature. So in a way that you're able to actually back up all those change blocks from the last backup that has been performed. So in terms of this backups on Snapshot with scale-up architecture, is that we are actually putting in place this auto-scaling capabilities and deployed it onto AWS EKS service. So back in 9.1, we have actually introduced this auto-scaling features on Azure. So Azure itself, we are using the Azure AKS. So over here in AWS, we're using the AWS Elastic Kubernetes Service Platform. And of course, for this auto-scaling features, so as and when there's actually an increase in the backup loads, the on-demand containers will actually be spin up and will be able to do up the backup of the snapshots onto the MSDP pool, right? And of course, ultimately, the values that we are actually seeing from customers out there is that they can actually have more cost-effective storage than as compared to the snapshots copies that they're actually placing on more expensive disk storage itself. And of course, in terms of the compute resources, we only spin up as and when is needed. And of course, once the backup job has all been completed, it will all these thin clients that we actually spin up will all be destroyed. And of course, this is actually a much secure method of data protection approach for customers as well, because in terms of snapshots that you are placing on all this expensive storage, it's not actually secured, right? And of course, when you talk about all this backup of these snapshots to our MSDP pool itself, we can also place it on a more capable storage. So over in AWS, we are having the immutable log that we have already introduced in NetBackup 9.1. So all this backup from snapshots copy can be placed on the immutable log storage itself. So thereafter, for this NetBackup 10 release, we're also introducing this concept of multi-tiering of the backup copies as well as to be able to replicate the copies of all these backups that we're actually performing out from the snapshots copy itself. But of course, in NetBackup 10, we are actually launching it, okay, for this new release for Azure. And of course, for AWS itself, it's actually coming out on the roadmap for the next release. So what this capability is doing is that we are actually utilizing the same NetBackup techniques that we know of. So in terms of the AIR, the auto image replication capabilities, as well as the SLP, the storage lifecycle policies that you have actually been customized as well as familiarized with, right? To actually duplicate the backup, the snapshot copies onto your backups, as well as to be able to duplicate another second copies of your backup copies and be able to replicate the copies, be whether you want it onto a longer term retention, a lower cost storage tier as well, or either that you actually want to replicate all these backup images to another different region of the same cloud provider or to a different cloud provider. So what I have on this screen, on the screen itself, is I've extracted a few of the screenshots out from the web UI. So over on this screenshot itself, you can see that there's actually additional options for you to define the cloud provider. So over in NetBackup 10, for these capabilities, we've actually first released it from Microsoft Azure. And of course, in terms of the backup schedule, the configuration portion, you're able to define whether do you want to keep the snapshots along with the backup copies. And of course, you can also have the options whether do you want to keep the snapshots copies only or either that of the backup copies only. But of course, in terms of the keeping the snapshots copy itself, so we will not be creating additional backup copies out from it. And of course, in terms of backup copy itself, if you are opting for that options, we're actually deleting away the snapshots after keeping the backup copies. And of course, thereafter, you're able to actually duplicate these backup copies onto a longer term retentions that you want that is of a different schedule as compared to your snapshot as well as backup copies. And as well as that, you can actually replicate this backup copy. So these are the other follow-up options that we're looking at. So in terms of the long-term retention storage that you can actually define, as well as the replication target that you want the backup copies to be replicated across to as well. So lastly, what we are having in this NetBackup 10. So in terms of this elastic cloud technologies that we're putting in place, is of course on this containerized NetBackup DDoS engine. So what this is all about is that we are actually putting our MSDP services and deploy it onto a Azure Kubernetes services platform. So what we'll be getting out from these capabilities is that we'll be having a scale out as well as a scale out MSDP engine. So with that capabilities, right? So customers actually need not have to actually bother in terms of how much storage they want to add on. So in terms of the backup copies that are actually placing onto the MSDP pool itself, you can actually scale out across the multiple nodes or engines that you are actually configuring, putting in place into this Kubernetes services platform, as well as that if let's say more compute resources is requiring for each of the individual nodes or engines of this MSDP DP services itself, you can also add on additional memory, additional cores out from it. So we're also putting in place a MSDP operator as well. So this operator is there to actually manage the clusters that you're having, be it's one single cluster or multiple clusters that you have within this Azure cloud environment. So of course, the values that we're actually giving to customers is of course of a high resilience MSDP engine services, as well as the scalability capabilities to simplify the management, as well as to reduce the TCO over in the cloud environment. Of course, when we talk about the deployment process itself, it actually requires minimal user intervention because we have actually put in place this whole deployment package onto the marketplace of Azure, whereby it's actually having the MSDP engine already bundled with this Azure AKS services. So this is just a deployment topologies that we are actually putting out onto this Azure Kubernetes Services platform itself. So as what you can see is right on this screen is that there are actually multiple MSDP classes that we're actually putting forth onto this Azure environment. And of course, within each classes itself, so we are actually having the MSDP engines or nodes that is actually running respectively. So we are also putting in place the MSDP operators to actually manage, be it whether it's a single cluster or the multiple cluster out there. So of course, in terms of these capabilities, right? So in terms of the manageability of this capability itself, customers need not have to bother about the amount of storage that they have to cater every time that their storage is about to run out. Whenever they actually need more storage capacity, you can actually just add on, and then all this storage capacity will be spread out evenly across all the MSDP nodes or engines that you have configured within the Kubernetes clusters. And of course, within this scale-out architecture itself, we're also providing a self-healing capabilities, such that if, let's say, in the event of one engines or one node of the MSDP actually fails, we're able to actually reroute the front-end services, whichever that you are actually specifying to be backup onto that particular protection policy itself, onto whichever remaining available MSDP engines or nodes that are still running within the MSDP X cluster. So we have actually gone through in terms of NetBackup 10, what we're having out of the automated cloud operations. So in terms of the elastic cloud compute, we're able to actually spin up as well as spin down the resources whenever it's needed. And of course, whenever all this backup job has completed, all these thin clients that we actually spin out from will actually be destroyed. And we talk about the efficiency in terms of the orchestration of this backup copies itself. We're able to actually back up the snapshot copies and be able to duplicate it as well as to replicate it across to different regions, different cloud providers, as well as to back to on-premise or either that onto our recovery vault storage as a service offering. And lastly of all, we are also introducing in this first release of this cloud deduplication services, our MSDP engine itself, that we're actually putting onto a Kubernetes cluster, whereby it's able to scale out as and when more storage is actually needed to actually cater for the storing of the backup images copy itself. We're also able to scale up the compute resources of the individual nodes or engines that is actually running within this cluster. So ultimately, what we're actually catering out from this automated cloud operations in NetBackup 10 is to give our customers the assurance of a data protection solutions that's able to actually simplify the overall data management platform, thereby reducing the cost as well as the carbon footprints over in the cloud. Okay, so that's the end of my slides itself. So yeah, before we actually get on to the Q&A, right? So I just want to pull out the last poll for this session. So for this poll itself, right? So we're actually running several NetBackup upgrade programs for our customers out there. So just to get a gauge, right, for all our customers, whether do you need assistance in terms of planning the upgrades to NetBackup 9.1 or either NetBackup 10. So you can actually specify whether do you actually require assistance from us, and we'll definitely be getting in touch with you.
Thanks, Jackie, for that session. And I think we should acknowledge that transforming NetBackup from the previous releases to the latest NetBackup 10 or even going further It
Mhm.
is a quite complex, complex proposition that we are dealing with here. Translating an existing NetBackup functionality into microservices-driven auto-scaling, elastic implementation can get complicated, and it is not a very straightforward thing to digest. So, considering that this is the first time we have spoken to the audience about how things are going to operate, I am quite certain that there are going to be a lot of questions. There are going to be a lot of I wouldn't say confusion, but there is
Mhm.
going to be a lot of overlap of thoughts, and that is where we are trying to bring simplicity to this complexity. And we will keep continuing with our sessions like these, where which give if you look at it today, we've just given you a high level 50,000 feet view of what we are trying to achieve. In short, I will summarize, a few key nuggets that I could get out of this session. But before that, I think, the objective of this session is also to show you the value of what NetBackup 10 has. And, it's a recommendation from Veritas as well as recommendation from the general software guidelines that you should be on the near latest version. So that's the outcome of poll 3. You can clearly see that net backup 9, 1 or 10, there are about 30 odd percent people who are keen on getting help or getting assistance from Veritas. But the more promising number is 40%, where people think that they have things under control. So our guidance or recommendation to all of you on the call is to be on at least 9.1 or NetBackup 10, and then gear yourself towards the autonomous data protection platform that NetBackup is evolving into. Again, we have had a lot of questions, so I'm sure we will spend the next 30 minutes talking about questions and the nitty-gritties of NetBackup 10. But before we go there, I'm going to quickly summarize my understanding. And Jackie, please feel free to reframe or rephrase what I'm trying to interpret here. Okay,
Sure.
so
Yep.
if I look at it, if I look at it, NetBackup from a cloud perspective and an automation perspective has introduced, backup from Snapshot. Now, backup from Snapshot is is actually solving the use case of, do I really need to worry once I take snapshots? Yes, of course, because your snapshots are vulnerable. They could be prone to deletion if a rogue admin comes in and starts running a delete all snapshot chain command. That's where we have clear second copy with the backup. And of course, with snapshots, what you also get is instant recovery. And same benefit comes when you're backing up that snapshot. And once you store it with NetBackup, we have the deduplication engine coming in. Now, the deduplication engine, as you could see, is now transforming into a cloud scale deduplication engine as well. So you don't really now start working around, how many dedupe pools do I need to create? What is the storage size that I need to create? Once you create a cluster of an auto scaling MSDPX, we will take care of scaling out and scaling down if required, and we will make sure that the storage is provisioned as we go. So the scale out MSDP is again a microservices based deduplication engine that will reduce your management overhead. And then we also have the scale out or auto scaling snapshot clients where based on your demands or your backup workloads, the backup will automatically scale up and scale down the number of compute resources as well as the snapshot streams that will be generated. Based on the number of streams, we will scale up or scale down the snapshot clients, ensuring that we are delivering the amount of throughput using more compute resources, and then all of that is channelized back into the deduplication pool. Now that's where we are heading. Now all of this is a part of automation, and the beauty of cloud is we leverage the cloud native technology to automate the entire life cycle of backups. So that's in summary what I took from the session. Jackie, any final comments before we get into the questions?
Yeah, so I mean, just to chime in, right? Based on the last post that we're getting, right? So I'm also seeing quite a percentage of the customers, right, that says that they are currently comfortable with the versions that they are using. So I'm not sure exactly in terms of the versions that those customers are using, right? But actually, my take for the NetBackup version to actually undertake what versions to move forward to. But of course, I know that some of the customers, they probably don't want to go to the latest. They probably have a N-1 kind of approach within their environment itself. So I would actually suggest customers to at least upgrade to 9.1. And of course, being said that, of course, today's topic is all about automating the cloud operations itself. But of course, that also doesn't stop us from talking about something along the line of the ransomware resiliency. So in 9.1 itself, we actually release all this anomaly detection and all those things, which can definitely help customers to actually deter in terms of the attacks that they will be having in their backup environment, right? And of course, for this automation technologies, so it's something that I have been waiting to actually see it for the longest time, because I think back in the old days, right, as well as that even of the current situation, when I talk to customers, right, they're also telling me that in terms of that, they're actually having a number of backup failures, whereby they are not able to actually complete their backup jobs within the stipulated backup windows. And as well as that, in terms of the backup policy definition, they have to actually designate which media server to actually assign the backup jobs to as well. So all these things, right, when we talk about all this cloud skill technology, thereafter in NetBackup 10 as well as beyond NetBackup 10 itself, we're actually putting more automations into it. So we're talking about all these things about self-provisioning, self-configuring, self-optimizing, as well as self-healing, right? For all these capabilities that we actually put forth. So it's something that I would deem that customers will actually also be excited as well as looking forward to as well, so that you will actually save and hassle as well as the time and efforts of them managing and actually operating the NetBackup environment on a day-to-day basis. Yep.
Great, thanks, Jacqueline, for that. All right, so now we do have a lot of questions. Daniel and I have tried to answer a few of them, but now that we have an opportunity to talk about questions, I'm going to start with something which is not directly related to the topic today, Jacqueline, but quite a few people have asked us on how does NetBackup assure backup integrity, and does NetBackup have features or capabilities around detection of ransomware or corruption, and how is that life cycle operated? So I can talk about it, but Jackie, did you want to go first, and then I can tip and tail around your answers?
Okay, sure. So in terms of the ransomware resiliency, right? Yeah. So yeah, we've talked about it. So we actually introduced the anomaly detection in NetBackup 9 itself. And of course, in NetBackup 10, right, we actually caters for the malware scanning capabilities. So I believe that the upcoming sessions that we have, right, sometime in mid-May itself, we'll be having another sessions or probably late May itself, that we'll be having another sessions that is targeting on ransomware resiliency. Is that right, Amit? Or has that session? Yeah.
That's correct. And if I just have to summarize, NetBackup has multiple layers of addressing the backup integrity and identifying the validity of a backup. The first line of approach is to be proactive. When you say proactive, that's when you try to identify anomalies, or you try to identify things based on correlating back into your normal patterns. So if I'm looking at, say, a changed deduplication rate, so deduplication rate change clearly implies that there is a deviation from the original number. but then it also shows that there is a lot of change that is happening onto the actual workload. The moment there is a the change rate goes up, your deduplication goes down. So that's a direct implication. Now
Yeah.
look at
And
the
also,
ransomware.
yeah, so Amit, just to chime in as well, right? So in terms of the integrity, right? So we also do have the checksum integrity check as well. So customers be able to actually specify their options after every of their backup job has completed. So it will actually do a checks throughout all the so-called the backups that has actually been actually backup onto the MSDP pool itself, just to make sure that all these backup images are in order and are be able to actually be restored in the future.
Yes, good point. And once you have identified that the backup and has completed and there are no anomalies, then subsequently what we also do is we have integration with malware engines. And those malware engines actually go and scan backup images. And those backup images then are flagged either clean or they are flagged impacted. And if they're impacted, we can actually look at the file system and the actual files that have been compromised. So the next time around, when somebody is trying to use that backup image for a restore, we know what are the impacted files, and then we are end up in giving an option to the customer that when you're restoring, do you just want to restore the clean files, or if you're running it in a sandbox, then you might want to restore the old or the corrupt files as well, just to see the impact of the damage. But all the flexibility is provided in terms of ransomware. So that's that question. I think we've spent enough time on that. The other question that was not on the question but on the chat, and I'm just going to use that here, is from a deduplication point of view, right? And Jackie, the question is, what deduplication rates can we expect from this cloud environment, or the scale MSDPX model, and does that depend on where the platform is hosted, and does that depend on, is the data kept on Azure S3 or Azure Blob or on-prem storage? Does the deduplication rate differ from where it is being stored?
Yeah, so good question, right, Amit? So in terms of the dedupe techniques that we actually utilize, right? So be it whether it's at on-prem, right, or be it whether it's over in the cloud itself, right? In terms of the MSDPX, all the scale out dedupe services that we're putting in place, right? So the technique still stays the same. So ultimately, it actually depends on the workload types. So if you talk about it's just a VM's kind of snapshot images itself, and of course, all these images, the percentage of the dedupe rate, right? Okay, might not be that high. But of course, when you're actually backing up all these snapshots, right, ultimately into our MSDP pool, as well as the subsequent backups itself, the dedupe rates will actually get more effective. And as well as that, we will be able to see a better dedupe rates out from all these backup images that we're actually storing.
That's spot on. Yeah. So, it purely depends on the workload type, the change rate, the annual growth, and things like that. So the platform does not directly play a role in terms of the backup deduplication. The dedupe engine is quite platform independent, as we can say, and it also doesn't matter where you host the dedupe engine. It could be an EC2 instance, or it could be a scale out cluster like an MSDPX, or it could just be a virtual machine or a physical machine running the same NetBackup version. What plays a role is the NetBackup version, and that's something that you should be cognizant of. All right, sounds good. So that's on that question. We still have quite a lot of questions coming in. Okay, so there is a follow-up on the same deduplication question. And again, when you speak about deduplication rates, as they are a function of multiple variables together, what we have seen, and when you look at the workload type, so what we have seen is, in case of virtual machines, or in case of virtualized environments, you can actually get dedupe rates between 95 or above. I have seen dedupe rates touching 99% as well. Now, this is again very specific to the environment and very specific to the variables like daily change rates, as well as the workload type, as well as the growth. But again, 95 plus is not surprising. 95% plus is not surprising for virtual machines. And with databases also, you could see anything between 85 to 95 or even higher dedupe rates. Now, that's on the dedupe rate here. Okay, now the other question, Jackie, that is also interesting is when it comes to auto scaling, and when it comes to ensuring auto scaling is functioning correctly, what or how does NetBackup decide the scale up, scale down resourcing requirements, and what are the building blocks of scale out, especially with the snapshot client?
Yeah, so Amit, that will actually depends on the number of parallel jobs that are actually running in concurrent, as well as that over in this scale out platforms that we're actually putting forth, right? You can also specify the number of VM extensions that you want to actually create accordingly as well. So in terms of all these things, right, one, you have actually put this into place, right, as well as the backup load when the backup jobs get started. So all these things will actually be monitored by the NetBackup engine itself. And of course, once the job actually increases up to a certain number of parallel jobs in concurrent, they will actually decide to spin up the necessary data containers to actually help out in the snapshots, as well as to back up the snapshots onto the MSDP pool. So there's actually various factors involved in actually deciding how many so-called additional compute resources or thin clients that need to be spin up accordingly. Yeah.
Spot on. And it is also important to acknowledge the fact that because NetBackup also has a visibility of your backup policy, every time that particular job or the batch runs, NetBackup will reevaluate the number of clients and the number of compute resources that you're going to need. So based on that, it is giving you that level of optimization of cost, as well as the simplicity of operations. And now if you marry that with something that Jackie spoke about today, is the intelligent policies. The cloud intelligent policies now expand based on your resource patterns. So if you are now creating, or you've seen cloud ecosystem being run by application owners, DevOps engineers, cloud architects, and there are so many other number of people who are creating resources in the cloud. Now with cloud intelligent policies, what happens is, every time you define a particular pattern, any new workload which fits that pattern is automatically included as part of your backup job. Now, that way, we are ensuring that we don't miss out any production workloads, even if the administrators or the application or DevOps admins forget to include that in the backup job. Now, because this is the workload scope is dynamic, it actually needs a dynamic snapshot client as well, because every time we are starting a backup, we will define if there are 100 instances or 200 instances or 1,000 instances to be backed up. And based on this evaluation, the number of clients which are going to run parallel streams is defined. So all of this is kind of dynamic, and then it simplifies your operational overhead by bringing in that level of automation in there. I hope that answers the question. Okay, as we move along, I'm going to quickly pass on to Daniel, because Daniel has just gone, like a machine answering these questions. So Daniel, did you have any questions that you thought would make sense talking in the forum? Daniel, you're on mute.
Yeah, I do see quite a number of questions around ransomware scanning. I think that was we shared in the last few sessions. maybe just to take the chance to also help to address the audience if there's any further queries around this as well. I think some of them were asking on as part of the scanning processes, right? Whether is it for ransomware, for whatever security concerns that customers may have. How do these scanning processes take place? Do they take place before the backup? Is customer able to actually do all this scanning even before restoration as well, right? So what are the different methods or mechanism that we do have in place as well, right? So maybe let me take to address this concern or questions, queries across the audience as well. So in the latest release of NetBackup, we do have something called a malware scanning, right? Meaning that we are able to perform an automated scanning on top of the usual backup operations, right? In NetBackup 9.1, we have actually released something called an anomaly detection. What it does essentially will be assigning a anomaly score, right, as part of the backup flow. Once the backup completes, right, we'll be doing a pattern checking, right, a baselining of the backup jobs metadata, right? How does the backup job look like in the previous runs, right? We'll be forming a baseline. What we'll be observing, right, will be like things like dedupe rates, and the number of files that we are protecting, the time that the backup actually takes place, right? So with all these different metadata that we collect, right, we're forming a baseline of the job itself, right? With that, if there's any deviation being spotted, right, suddenly there's a huge change in the dedupe rate, a huge change in the number of files being observed. What we will then further on to do, right, we'll be assigning a high risk score to this anomaly scoring. Thereafter, we'll be triggering a automated scanning via the NetBackup malware scanner. And from there, as part of backup job, we'll be then going to scan the backup images after the backup completes. Right, so this will allow us to then be able to quickly pick up any malware that is present as well. Right. Again, on top of this automated method of scanning, we are also allowing customers to do a manual scanning before any recovery that you want to do as well. Right, so if you want to be double sure before any critical restoration jobs, for example, you can also trigger a additional step to actually do that malware scanning. Right, so this guarantees or gives the assurance to our customers to make sure that they do have, when they do any recovery, all these copies are actually clean copies and there are not any impacted copies as well. Yeah. So this addresses any questions that was around these scanning capabilities of NetBackup that we have as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Daniel. And it's good that it's good that we are now trying to connect the feature set that NetBackup offers, the anomaly detection, ransomware, and then if you look at the cloud scale solutions that we spoke about right now, you can now connect the dots of where the the autonomous data protection is taking us to. All right, so we have about 7 minutes and we still have questions coming in. So I am actually going to pick up a couple of questions and see if that's a new topic. So here I see two questions around ransomware. Okay, so there is an interesting question, and this is probably going to take a more theoretical approach than an actual approach, where does Veritas plan to have an own cloud backup platform rather than using Azure or AWS? Now this is quite an interesting and a deep-rooted question, and it's a good avenue for me to bring out a thought process. Now let's look at the core building blocks of NetBackup, right? Or rather cloud building blocks of NetBackup. So the most important thing to acknowledge here is when we are looking at a cloud architecture, the cloud architecture is made up of the backup infrastructure which runs in the compute, and then the retention infrastructure which runs on the storage platform, right? So these are the two key building blocks. Of course, there is peripherals around network security as well as data pipelines, But more importantly, if I just look at the compute and storage, these are the two aspects that NetBackup would rely on when hosting or building a cloud architecture. Now, with this, we have seen a couple of variations, right? The most important point, or the most important consideration that anybody has in the cloud is cost. Now, if I look at the cloud infrastructure of compute, once you start running the compute generally holds true in terms of its size. What does not hold true is the storage. Because as your capacity or your workload sizes grow, your storage requirements are increased. So that's where the dependency of the cost is directly tied onto the storage. The infrastructure, yes, every now and then you do need to scale up and scale down on the infrastructure, but the storage is always going up because you can't delete backups until your retention period is over. And with so with needs of warm storage and immutable storage, your storage demands are going higher. So what Veritas has done is Veritas is aiming to get to a point where we deliver a managed service on the storage. We deliver a managed service on the retention layer of these building blocks. So with NetBackup Recovery Vault, what we have done is NetBackup Recovery Vault is a managed service for storage where we hold your long-term retention copies, right? Veritas holds your long-term retention copies, and the contract between the customer and Veritas is purely defined on how many terabytes or petabytes of deduplicated storage are you going to use in the recovery vault console. That's where the backend terabytes start coming in. So from a customer point of view, they are actually tiering off long-term retention into Veritas Recovery Vault, and Recovery Vault is addressing your concern of storage. Now, because it is deduplicated, because it is confined within the Veritas boundary, we can give you a predictable cost of ownership, and that's where the cost consideration starts going up. Now, the reason why I'm trying to associate this with the building blocks is because Veritas is now offering a managed service on storage, right? Now, yes, this managed service is hosted on a cloud platform, which is Azure today. Again, Veritas does not make disks. We don't make, we don't make cloud infrastructure. But what we do is we provide the SLAs. We provide you the reliability that is needed for your backup retention on any storage. So that's where NetBackup Recovery Vault is a solution or a product that gives you the managed retention or managed storage from a cloud point of view for your backups. Now, I know that this has been a long-winded answer to the question, but we are making steps towards bringing that value out of existing cloud platforms to give you that performance as well as cost benefit when it comes to operations. Daniel, Jackie, anything that you wanted to add here? I've been blabbering for quite some time now.
Yeah, I think Amit, rightfully as what you mentioned, right? So yeah, so at the moment, right? So we are not in the known, right? That we are going to get our so-called our NetBackup Cloud kind of so-called approach, right, onto the cloud platform itself. But of course, I think for a start, right, back in NetBackup 9.1, we have already released our Recovery Vault, which is a storage as a service offering. So yeah, that would actually give customers the comfort as well as the flexibility, right, of actually segregating their backup copies out from the production workloads where it's actually originally residing on. And of course, thereafter, right, of course, we're also looking at more cloud scale technology to actually ramp up the performance as well as to automate the kind of operations that customers need not actually have to manage to actually manage the NetBackup environment themselves over in the cloud. Yeah, so these are the things that we are actually looking at in terms of the roadmaps beyond NetBackup 10 itself.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, I'm looking at the clock now. We are right at time. So I'm going to conclude this session. Thank you, Jackie and Daniel, for the brilliant, insightful session. And thank you all attendees for hanging on till the end. Really appreciate your support. We will soon have another session in the next couple of weeks talking about another aspect of NetBackup 10. Until then, I look forward to hearing from you if you have any follow-up questions. We will respond to some questions if we've not answered anyway, but our objective is to have this as more interactive as possible. So thank you again for joining in, and hope you have a lovely week ahead. And I look forward to speaking to you next time around in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks again, and have a lovely day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.